Cannabis Broadcasting Group here at cbgtv.com. Individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician. This show is a rebroadcast of the Green Crush podcast with Alan Park. Heard on 420radio.ca and seen on cbgtv.com.
They deserve to know. Deserve to know. Deserve to know.
They deserve to know. Welcome to Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. I'm your host. We've got some green crushing to do, and we've got some conspiracy queries to ask. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's an elevated existence. I'm out on a limb saying it. Hate me all you want. I don't care anymore. It's definitely elevated, but it's not unavailable elevated. It's available. You can find it. It's right over there. The elevation comes from being aware of the history of a plant. So you just have to read. It's not a big deal to be elevated. You just have to read, and you have to try some of the things you're reading. Yeah, there's the raven. We're going to leave the raven on today because for this very special episode of Green Crush with... There it is. Yeah, I was just waiting for that one more raise the fist guy. It's very important that I make it clear that this show today was booked, I don't know, early January, something like that. And our guest, Dr. Sam Malachi, was booked to be on, and we were thrilled because, of course, we've heard of Dr. Sam. We know a lot about him. And he's written a book, which is, I've been plugging it on the show. Here it is. Is that the camera? Can we see that? There we go. Yeah, The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. Now, this book came about, well, to my knowledge anyway, well after I realized that you can't really talk about cannabis without talking about conspiracy. And I'm so sorry if you think the other way. Let that be lesson number one today. Not that this is a lesson fest. This is more of an expose on some of the things that I've been able to learn. And most interestingly, some of the things I've been able to learn are the means to be able to continue my meat puppet existence here on this planet. There are conspiracies and a greater conspiracy wrapped around cannabis use, consumption, no matter how far back you go. And so I was super thrilled to find this out. I have intuited earlier that vitamin weed is a thing, that weeds are vitamins in food. And then, of course, we have on a guest with a book that tells us this. And I've been able to find out a lot of things, and it's kind of creeping me out because as I read this book about cannabis and its surrounding conspiracy, a lot of the evidentiary awarenesses from the doctor have come to me, and I don't think I'm thinking of them. I don't think that I'm sitting there working it out and going, oh, this is the answer to this question. It's kind of like you're accessing a conduit of information. like a giant hose of like in the summer when you have that kind of hose that has the holes in it, the pinholes. So you're drinking out of one end, and some of the other kids are drinking out of the other. It's all the same water in the same hose. And I'm not an author, although people are trying to talk me into it, and I don't know how I'll find the time to put that together. I can't even get down here once a week. But anyway, this author was so exciting to us to find out about it, and Dr. Sam Malachi was booked to be on the show. He left Vancouver to fly to Toronto to do a little book tour and talk about the book and about cannabis and Canada's version of changing the laws from how we used to arrest you to how we're going to arrest you, and the medical awarenesses that the doctor has come up with. And unfortunately, he did suffer a stroke and en route to this city. And he now begins a journey of recovery. And this has made the book reading a little difficult for me because he's already done that about 15 times in his life. An advanced man in years, a man of advanced years, Dr. Sam Malachi, just an incredibly wonderful guy. I was so looking forward to seeing him, and now I'm going to have to put that off a little bit while the immediate team surrounds him with help, and those of us standing on the sides are willing to do anything at any time anybody asks. But I didn't want to cancel the episode, and I didn't want to book a new person to come on, a different guest. This book is so important that I just said, okay, well, I told Sam's publicist or manager or our team, said, listen, I just want to do the show anyway. I want to bring people's awareness to this book right here, okay? It's a great book. I'm not even all the way through it yet. I'm happy to mention that. But it's tough. It took me longer than I thought because Sam, while you read the terrible things that he's already been through and then you realize he's having another tough fight right now, there's just a whole bunch of unfairness of life that comes seeping in while you try to read this thing. And it's too bad. So it's taken me a little longer than I would have liked. But Dr. Sam Malachi, that's Mellace, this show is focused on him, on you, and to pick up a bit of the gap from Sam is one of Sam's patients. And this is a patient who has done very well using what Sam worked with. He'll talk about it more specifically. His name is Paul Hartman, and he lives in Ontario. Sam's originally from around here in the Toronto area, and we'll find out how they hooked up. We'll find out why Paul wanted to come in and talk about it. Sam Malachi is a long-standing medical marijuana activist. He got into a car crash. We'll probably hear about some of that and how he made his way through the miasma of bullshit rules and regulations in Canada to be able to grow more cannabis on some property in British Columbia than anyone in North America. He's already suffered through a liver condition. Very well thought out and understood to believe that the liver condition came on from taking too many opioids, and taking too many opioids because he was in a car crash. And so now he has written this book, and he is telling us various things that I've always said, like there are certainly more ways to take this cannabis stuff into your body than just smoking. I wouldn't even recommend it, although I don't not recommend it. I also do it at time to time, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. That's your own choice. But then again, I wouldn't make laws against it either. So if you want to do that, okay. There's also vaping it, which is a very effective way to get it into your system. And why should we do that? Because you have an endocannabinoid system filled with receptors waiting for this nutrient. If you're new to the show, what's Green Crush? Green Crush is, well, the green is the cannabis. The crush is what it does to cancer, or what it did to cancer in my case. I'm supposed to be dead, folks. This show comes from beyond the grave. They guaranteed it. They promised me there was nothing else I could do. This was at the end of 2013. And I was able to turn that around with cannabis. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of topics today with about Dr. Samuel Malachi and the great work that he has laid down for the rest of us upon which to benefit, and his awareness of this magical plant. Don't get too freaked out about the word magical. It's a magical plant. How can it help so many different illnesses? It must be magic. Or it's food. Or it's food with a vitamin in it. The same way if you need to eat protein for whatever reason, or you need to eat vitamin C for whatever reason, it's not only just going to do one thing for you. So that's why people think that when they hear that cannabis does a lot for you, they think, oh, this is ridiculous. You can't possibly be doing all those things. You're just a crazy person high on the loco weed. And there are people that still think like that. One of the people that used to think like that is the father of our current prime minister, and he's also the current prime minister, very strict and involving the police at the very beginning of this rampage into shifting the perception and access of Canadians getting their hands on cannabis. They're ushering out a series of crummy old laws and bringing in 45 new ones. That's how legal it's going to be. I know Canada is considered to be this beacon around the world of acceptance with cannabis, but come on, take a closer look. You know, not everybody in Sweden is blonde, right? So get over that misconception. We don't have the fantastic series of rules and laws that you're talking about. We do have a few things to cover, though, before we bring Paul into the studio. First of all, I'm going to say that we have a previous guest to talk about. First of all, Jenny Hallam. She is a mother from Australia, a woman from Australia, and sorry about that. Maybe she's a mother. I don't know, but we've had so many great people fighting for this cannabis plant that. To be something that we can access. And we had Jenny on the show. We got a lot of great response from Australian listeners and American listeners. Hello to all of the countries around the world tuning in. And such as Vera Toomey in Ireland, she has a daughter that she was able to win legal access. One of 4 people in Ireland. One of 4 people in Ireland who are legally allowed to use it for her daughter, because it has been helping her daughter, and her daughter's doing very well with this. And the authorities don't want to really hear too much about that. They're just glad she shut up, and they want her to be quiet. Unfortunately, Jenny Hallam, who is going to be heading to court this Friday, just in a couple of days from now, as we drop this show. This will be early March when she heads to court in Australia. And can you believe it? Like, these charges are bullshit, okay? Anybody getting in the way of someone using this plant to help themselves, it's a right. We've already had a judge rule that way on this in Canada decades ago. They just choose to ignore these facts. Now, Canada is in the Commonwealth under the thumb of the Queen. So is Australia. So it makes no sense to me that there can be such variance in the laws. We don't have any women that I know of, or any people whatsoever, fighting a fight such as Jenny Hallam from Australia. But we already knew she was going to, for possession charges, we knew there was a bevy of charges there. What she told us about, and we fully believe that people are aware now that this product, this plant, is so helpful and so life-giving and health-giving that Jenny might catch a break, and things might be shifting a little bit more towards openness and acceptance, as is our right and as is our insistence, and as should be the case with any country that pretends to tout democracy, when most people want this, and most people don't want to be criminalized by using it. And we thought maybe Jenny was going to get some good news this coming Friday regarding the multitude of charges that she's already suffering through. Once again, she's found out this stuff works. She's been helping other people improve their lives and their medical conditions with this substance. But guess what? She had to go on a live stream to talk about the sudden, last-minute, literally a doubling down of the charges being laid against her in Australia. Can you believe that? Here we're going to cue up Jenny talking about how the government of Australia, well, a lot of people think is, a really progressive, advanced kind of culture. They got rid of guns years ago, and sure. But what they're doing to Jenny is outrageous. And I know you're probably, not everyone listening to this show is Australian, but find out a letter that you write a letter, send an email, do something, send it to the Australian authorities in charge of Jenny's new charges. So here's Jenny talking about a recent downturn in the legal system that she suffers under, that we all suffer under as long as this kind of oppression and rights snuffing and bullshit can continue. Here's Jenny making a plea for all of us to try and understand.
Specifics, because I'm not sure how much they're talking about it, but there was another healer that was arrested and raided this week, an edible maker, another amazing couple that we're helping out. Now, this is not acceptable, and this is exactly what they're doing. They're trying to take us all out. One by one, they are trying to take us all out, so the pharmaceutical companies have basically got everything. They've got it all tied up, and we're not going to let that happen, because as soon as they take one of us out, there's going to be someone else who's going to take their place, and if they take me out, then somebody else will step up and take my place. And if they take anybody else in this community out, someone will step up and take their place. We're not putting up with this anymore, and we are not going away. Okay? Get that? Government, politicians, all the pharmaceutical companies, whatever assholes are out there that are trying to stop this, we are not going away. Get this through your fucking heads. We are not going away. We are going to keep going. We are going to keep pushing, and we are going to keep standing up until we get this through. Because we've got no fucking choice. People are dying, and when are you going to understand that? People are dying. Children are dying every day. People are getting arrested for having a plant, for God's sake. A plant, a vegetable. Why are we still getting arrested for having a vegetable? Why are we getting arrested for using something to make us feel better when people can sit there and piss on until they're absolute maggoted, and that's acceptable? People can get violent and punch people in the head and kill people, and that is acceptable. Socially acceptable to drink alcohol in this country, but it is not socially acceptable to use marijuana or cannabis. Sorry, don't ever use that word marijuana, and I've been brainwashed with that today because that's all I've heard. I am so sick of this, and I am sorry. I am sorry for getting angry. I am sorry for getting passionate. I am sorry for...
No.
I am just so sorry for all the bullshit. I am sorry for letting you down. I'm sorry for the people that haven't made it and the ones that have died waiting for this. I am so, so sorry. And I know it's not my fault. I know it's not just my fault, but I am sorry. You don't understand, or most people don't understand what it's like to be in my position. Everyone is coming at me from a different direction. I have the medicinal users or the medicinal supporters who don't like the recreational supporters and don't think I should mention recreational. I have the recreational users who are angry at me for just pushing medicinal and not looking after them first. I have the people that are just want both and are angry at me for going for one and one before the other. I have the non-cannabis users that are attacking me and calling me a drug dealer and saying that all we're going to do is ruin this country by letting us have cannabis in this country.
Idiots.
There are so many different opinions, and I have so many people telling me what I should be doing, how I should be going about this. I have several people, a couple of people in particular, that harass me about the New South Wales bill. Yes, I support the New South Wales bill. Will you please get off my fucking back? Okay? Yes, I support the New South Wales bill, and I think everybody should look at the New South Wales bill and get on board and try and support it as well. It is the closest thing we've got at the moment to what we want. It might not be perfect, but it's the closest thing. All right, so let's stop bitching and moaning about what we haven't got and start appreciating the few of the little things that we have got.
That's a good point. I'm going to leave it there. This is a 20-minute pouring out from the heart. And you don't have to apologize, and I know you're not sorry for yourself. I know you don't think it's your fault, Jenny. You've done very well so far, bringing yourself to attention and this cause, and anyone that's upset about what's it going to do to the country is probably saying that from behind a pint of lager. Or a non-drinker. You know, it's a real tribal situation. It's those who get it from an elevated perspective and those who don't. I'm happy to draw those lines. Anybody still bitching and moaning about the consumption of this drug, let's call it a drug for a minute. Let's call it the drug of marijuana. She doesn't want to call it that anymore because that was a demonization given to it by a bunch of American freaks. Harvey Ainslinger decided to take cannabis and call it marijuana and associate it vis-a-vis racism. Thank goodness America is built on a foundation of racism, or they never could have gotten away with this demonization of cannabis and calling it marijuana. But it's cannabis, and it's helping people, and I can vouch for that. Anecdotally, of course. I love that. It's only anecdotal. Yeah, well, thousands of people are saying this same anecdote. And we don't all sit around and collude and dream things up in secret rooms as so many of the policy setters do. And if you don't understand that and you don't believe that and you think this stuff is a bad thing for you to get a hold of because you don't know how to use it, I'd be surprised if you were listening at all. And I would ask you to consider maybe some Cecil and Beanie cartoons on YouTube. That probably fits your intellectual purview. So there we go with Jenny Hallam. Obviously upset. I wish we could get a couple of plane loads of folks to crowd out that courtroom and tell these fools what they're doing and what they should not be doing. It would be just so much easier to not have that to worry about. A couple of quick notes. Says here, research is lacking on medical marijuana, says a new prescription guideline. Medical marijuana guideline developed by Edmonton researchers warns physicians that the risks may outweigh the benefits for the vast majority of patients. Always love the word may in your opening premise. The guideline published Thursday in the Canadian Family Physician Journal suggests the benefits of medical cannabis may be overstated, and research on its medicinal properties is sorely lacking. It's sorely lacking because it's been illegal. It's been illegal because it's been successful at helping people. And it's a circle of ignorance again. Canadian doctors should think twice before prescribing the drug, said Mike Allen, who led the research team. For most things, we shouldn't be recommending it because we don't have enough research to say if the benefits of the therapy outweigh the risks of the therapy. What are the risks of the therapy? I thought you didn't have enough research. I thought you didn't know enough. So you don't know anything and you're telling us how bad it is. Evidence-based medicine at the University of Alberta. He says the guideline was based on a review of clinical trials involving medical cannabis. It's going to be distributed to 30,000 physicians, this document, across the country, and is intended as a new protocol for doctors to use on deciding whether or not to prescribe it. This is on the CBC, by the way. The document, it says here that in it, thousands of Canadians are already prescribed medical marijuana, and that number is expected to rise after marijuana is legalized this summer. Family doctors face increasing pressures from patients asking for medicinal pot, but the study authors suggest there's little data for physicians to rely on before making the decision. This is so full of shit. It chokes me right out that I know that I am going to be going over the CBC, the Coles, pretty soon, the Coles of CBC. I do believe they're coming to my next check-up at my doctor this Friday, so we'll be talking about that next week. The reporter from CBC who had contacted me after I shook down the premier of this collective pile of freaks called Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, had a town hall, and I shouted her down. I think it's on episode 19 or something of this very show. And we found out that she wasn't really interested in continuing the conversation at all. But this gentleman, he's a reporter from CBC, decided to film me for that night's news and ask a few questions, and it didn't get on. But now he's going to come and ask me a few questions at my doctor's. He's working on some kind of magazine piece. I don't know the impetus for this. I don't know if he's genuinely fascinated and interested, or he could be. He could be a reporter that wants to get all of this out. I just don't trust the upper echelon when they're pumping out crap like this. They bitch and moan at us about anecdotal. Are you kidding me? This study may show that it might be something that could do something, but we don't know because we don't have research. I mean, there's nothing more anecdotal than that. These people live in a double cellophane paranoid window of stupidity half the time, honestly. He says mental health problems, this guideline writer, what's his guy? He's got my name there, Dr. Mike Allen. He says that in most cases, the number of randomized studies involving medical cannabis was extremely small, and once again, he's going to make data conclusions. In the rare instances where research did exist, the studies were narrow in scope or poorly executed. And so that's how he knows it's no good. I want to get one of these freaks in here to talk to. This is ridiculous. He said mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder are the number 2 reason medical marijuana is prescribed. But research doesn't support its use for those patients. Unless you talk to the patient who feels a lot better from taking it. Oh, my God. This just goes on and on and on. This attack on the credibility. Well, guess what? We're going to bring our guest in a couple of seconds, and we're going to kick off. I'm going to save this particular item for him. We're going to talk about these things together. Hey, Shoppers Drug Mart. Shoppers Drug Mart used to hate medical cannabis, and now they love it because they just signed a deal with Aurora Cannabis. They wanted to sell this a while ago. Basically, if you're big and powerful and you've already sold so many opioids that so many people are already screwed up and suffering from liver diseases and everything else, you get to sell cannabis later, even though there's no research, according to the CBC. Licensed producer Aurora Cannabis has signed a deal to supply medical marijuana to Shoppers Drug Mart. The agreement is subject to Health Canada's approval of the pharmacy chain's application. Approval sounds like this. Sounds like when you're moving money around, right? That's what the approval is going to be all about. Aurora's products are expected to be sold online as current Canadian regulations prohibit the sale of medical marijuana in pharmacy locations. Because it's a medicine, right? So how do they get to call it a medicine and then they won't sell it in a pharmacy, because it's a medicine? And then, you can't tax and excise tax prescription drugs, but they're going to tax this one at about $400 or $500 a pound. Wow. So that's the Shoppers Drug Mart, and we're going to have to come up with a long list of businesses to boycott based on this kind of shit. But I'm really getting tired of it, especially when we have a teenage girl using cannabis oil to treat leukemia and getting great results. And so doctors published a case study. And so this guy, Mike Allen in Canada, says, we don't have enough data for this. We don't have enough data for Mike Allen to keep his fucking job. That's what we don't have data for. All right, and here's one for the cops, and then we're going to bring our guest in. He's here now. Here's one for the cops. In a first-of-its-kind study, virtually no driving impairment under the influence of marijuana. Don't care, we're going to arrest you anyway. Look, you can't keep complaining there's no science, and then when the science comes in counter to your, police state agenda, you don't like it. Because as Dr. Sam Malachi says in his book, something else I came up with on my own just from thinking and researching, courtesy of this very herb, it says in the book that this has been going on for a long time, where they just repress the facts and they choose to arrest. And if you go through the ledgers and if you go through the spreadsheets and if you carve through the budgets, and they're always bitching about not having enough money, guess what? For a legal substance, you don't need as many police officers in the employ as we now have. The police officers union could take fewer members. We don't need as many police chiefs because so much of the time spent looking at things is fictional. You don't need it. These guys get a fatter budget every single time based on bullshit. We don't need that many people busting people for a plant, for a food, for a vegetable. And that's also written up in Sam's book. We got some more topics to cover later on, but first, let me just bring our guests into the studio. Very exciting. Now, I said it when we first started speaking on the phone. That, because, we got a system overload? You're not kidding. We got a show overload. Let's try that again. I spoke with Paul on the phone, and I said, listen, this is a terrible reason for us to meet. No offense, I'd love to meet you. I was supposed to meet Sam, and Sam's not well. And Paul stepped up to the plate. So here we have Paul Hartman. Do you have some letters after your name? You should. You seem like the kind of guy that would have...
I do. I have some letters after it, but
Here we go.
The letters are from places that you really wouldn't want to have them from.
Like 897-35246?
Well, I got my PhD in prison.
We're just going to jump right to the prison.
Yeah, we'll just whoops.
Okay, so Paul Hartman is here. Paul is a patient. Number one reason he's here, he is a patient of Dr. Sam Malott. If you're looking at this, I am showing you this now. On not everybody's looking at this. Some people are listening to this. But if you're looking at this, look at this beautiful book written by a man who is a doctor, who has helped our guest here. Very welcome. Very glad you're here to spend some time with us. Do we have some camera on Paul? Is he there? Okay.
I'm on camera.
Not like I'm the
Holy
director.
shit,
You know, I
wow.
want to make sure you're covered.
Wow.
We had a guest in one time. The whole time just looking at my mouse. That's kind of. But so you are a victim. There's so many jumping in points into this pool of information and conversation. I'm so looking forward to speaking with you because I'm just going to run a little bit through a tiny bio of yourself. Okay, so Paul is one of three brothers, and unfortunately, one of the brothers unfortunately is involved as a manager in Hollywood. So unfortunately, he. No, he's a great guy also. He has a Hollywood manager brother, and you were involved in Hollywood, and you're going to tell us about that. And, of course, your brother, unfortunately, your other brother, unfortunately, Phil Hartman, was murdered by his spouse, his wife. Is that the case? And that's a horrible story that anybody can look up, and it's not nice. And it's extremely difficult to think about it. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it. It's completely up to Paul. But I will say that sometime after Phil's passing, another gentleman whose name escapes me began a petition to get Phil marked on the Canadian Walk of Fame.
Yeah, Alex Stevens.
Stevens.
From
And
Whitby, Ontario.
yeah, so he started this thing as a fan of Phil, and how could you not be if you'd ever seen him, and to get him recognized, and eventually he contacted you, or you
Well,
came across that, and you guys pushed this thing into being.
I found him on Facebook doing some research. We were trying to figure out what Phil's fan base was, right, and what was going on with it. And because I've been working on Phil projects, animating his comedy album Flat TV and another project, and in the process of trying to figure out what had happened with Phil's fan base, I found Alex Stevens, and I guess he had started the campaign in 2007, and we were at 2011 when I found him. And then we banded together, and by end of 2012, we had gotten Phil his star in the Cineplex Legends Award, and which I actually brought with me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, because tomorrow morning I do an NBC interview for 3 hours for a documentary on Phil.
Oh, that's right. You said that NBC is doing an hour and a half show?
Documentary on Phil.
Documentary
yeah.
on. They're going to talk to you for 3 hours. Wow.
So, but anyways, so that was the start of getting Phil his star here, which took almost 3 years by the time we did it.
Campaigning, everything you need to do.
Campaigning, yeah, because it's all vote based, right? And what really kicked it over the edge was our common buddy Ben Miner.
Oh, sure. Sirius XM.
Yeah, and Joe Thistle came on board and gave us a month of promotion going into and we crushed the votes.
Yeah, that's great.
They said that we got more votes than ever in the history of the whole event.
Wow.
More votes than all the other people combined.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
Wow.
like we just
not just for that year, but ever?
Well, for that year.
For that year. Everybody else and then
everybody else
brother
combined didn't get as many as we did for Phil in that one period. So that was a real high point in the whole thing, and especially considering Phil was the guy who gave me my first joint.
Okay, so that's a great segue. Let's get to that. So you three brothers what are you spaced out by a couple, 3 years each or something?
Phil and I were 5 years apart.
Him being older than you? Or
yeah, I'm the youngest brother, and John is now over 75, I'm sure. So, and so Phil would be 70 now.
Okay, so you're all Canadian boys.
Yeah, we're all from Brantford,
Ontario, and then and is that where you got your first joint from brother Phil?
No,
Down in the
we
States.
moved to California when I was young. I was 5, and so I would be 13.
13.
And Phil would be 18.
Okay.
And it was the 60s in L.A., you know, and Phil was a surfer, and I was a surfer, and you know, Phil and John were what I call first-generation hippies.
Okay.
John, being a manager in the music business, he started in the mailroom at William Morris with David Geffen.
Oh, right.
He worked for Colonel Tom Parker for a year as his secretary, and he managed Elvis.
Yeah.
So he has a chapter in one of Elvis's biographies.
That's Elvis Presley for some of our younger listeners.
Yeah, and I mean, and one of the great John stories is the Colonel had him move Elvis out of his house in Palm Springs, and he finds the gold lame suit.
Right.
So he takes the gold lame suit to the nearest drugstore where they have a photo booth, and he puts it on and gets pictures of himself in it.
That's amazing. In Elvis's suit.
In Elvis's suit. And I and we as kids lived right next to the LA airport. And so when John would do the mailroom run to the airport to pick a client up, they would, you know, drive right by my parents' street. And so one day I come home from school and there's a limo in front of the house, and it was always John, you know. And I go in and you know, I was 12. I didn't know shit, you know. And here's Elvis, you know, my mother's freaking losing her shit, right? Elvis is in the living room.
That's funny.
With my brother, and I'm just like, whatever. And later I learned that the story was they were coming from the airport, and Elvis asked John about, so where are you from? Where do you live? He goes, well, matter of fact, my mom lives right here.
Right.
And he goes, are we going to see your mom?
Oh, amazing.
And he was just, no, I'm taking you to the Colonel, you know? Right. And he said, oh, no, we're going to go see your mom.
Oh, that's the best.
And so they go, and I was coming home from Catholic school and walk in, and here's Elvis with my mother, right? And then that was the kind of stuff that happened.
Did you make him a peanut butter and banana sandwich?
I didn't even know who he was, right? Because the Beatles, right?
Sure. That's incredible. So okay, so this is the thing that is a bit of a concern. We were talking earlier about this, and you said that your brother gave you a joint. So you smoked it with him, or you took it to school, and then you got onto the, I'm taking joints all the time.
Well, what happened was, you know, it was the 60s in L.A., and you know, LSD and pills and everything were the most common drugs you could get your hands on at that time. Marijuana was actually kind of hard to get.
Okay.
And
you say pills, like, what do you mean, like bennies and
Benzedrine? Yeah, exactly. Bennies, Seconal, Tuinal, the downers, right? Stuff like that. And
what's that other one that really slows you down?
Well, there was Roar 714 Quaaludes.
Quaaludes,
right?
there
Those
you
came
go.
after. And then there was Rohypnol, which was another
Right.
version of date rape drug,
Yeah.
drug right? But anyways, it was hard to get pot in California, in the early days. And
It's hard to
So,
believe, but I understand.
when Phil gave me my first joint, and this is a quote that I use all the time, and it was, he hands it to me and he said, alcohol is for people who don't care and don't care to think. And he said, marijuana is for people who care and care to think.
And when did he say this? In the 60s?
He said this in the 60s when he gave me my first joint. And, being the younger brother, anything that my two older brothers loved, I had to love more. And so, I kind of threw myself into all those things that were the spiritual essentials of hippiedom, right? And cannabis and psychedelics were part of that whole thing, and yoga and vegetarianism and all those things were kind of just
That was all happening
all
at the time.
happening, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of my sojourn with cannabis, and which, because I was a surfer, Phil was a surfer, and he gave me my first surfboard and first joint, and my life was a series of firsts with him, and so I had to learn everything about it, and I went to Mexico, and I traveled all through Mexico, and I went to, I read the Carlos Castaneda books, and
Sure.
those were like road maps for me, and so I ended up going to all those places in those books, and ended up spending a good 6 years in the province of Oaxaca, and became intimate with cannabis there, and the people who were growing it and exporting it.
So
and
back then, did you know about trichomes and all of these
No,
different things that
no,
were
we didn't
rolling
know.
around in now?
No, we didn't know shit.
You just knew to
We-
grow it.
Well, we knew what was good, right?
Yeah.
And the thing was that with my brothers in the music business of the 60s was driven by good cannabis and psychedelic drugs, right? I mean, all the music that we enjoyed from that time period was blossomed because of those things.
Sure.
And so I naturally kind of evolved into selling weed into that market. And so everybody I knew,
The musicians in
musicians, producers, directors, film people, you name it. And all that kind of weed was imported at first. And then,
that market. Mexico.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I went and I found the weed there, and kind of became my job with setting up loads for people, bringing them to the States, whether it was,
So you would go to Mexico, or
yeah.
did you ever go to South America, like Colombia, get Colombian
Oh, yeah,
gold?
yeah,
or-
yeah. I went all the way down to Ecuador.
Wow. Obtaining.
Mostly exploring. I didn't ever ship anything from Colombia. I had other relatives who did, though.
Wow.
But I went looking just to see. I was fascinated with the culture, and the generosity of the people there, and did a couple of very large grows down there myself, which was extraordinary.
What? Give me a number. Give me some kind of number to help me with large.
Large, 50,000 plants.
Okay, I was gonna say that's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and on my Facebook page, you see pictures of stuff, of fields I bought and things like that.
Yeah.
And my cover for traveling down there was photography, so I always went with a huge amount of camera equipment, and I photographed the shit out of it.
And how many people do you have helping you doing that? I just have to make sure you're a bit closer to the old.
Actually, not that many. I mean, it was amazing how few people we did those kind of things
Yeah.
with. It was less than a dozen people.
So you don't have everything coming out at the same time, because you can't just plant 50,000 seeds all of a sudden, right? So everything's kind of at a staggered pace. Like here's some seedlings, and here's one that's 3 weeks
one of the
old.
things that happens at that latitude is because the photo period, like cannabis is photo period dependent, most of it, right? Photo period dependent means it is signaled to go into bloom when the days get shorter, right?
Right.
So when you're at that latitude in southern Mexico, latitude 16, something like that, the photo period doesn't change a whole lot. It's 12 and 12 most of the time. So that is when plants go into bloom in North America, right?
Sure.
So working with indigenous strains at that time was how it was done. And the plants grew on a normal growth schedule and still finished in September and October, even in Mexico. So we were some of the first to bring North American strains down there.
Wow.
Which is one of the things I regret doing.
Why is that?
Well, because you bring all these new genetics into a place and you pollute the natural ones that are there,
Okay.
right? And they become watered down, and you lose them essentially to in the mix of things.
Poor handling.
Handling.
So at this time, though, you're a 18, 20-year-old kid, and you've got access to this cannabis, and you're selling it to the stars?
By time I was doing that, I was in my early 20s. I think I did my first smuggle when I was 19. I carried 100 pounds on a backpack to Bisbee, Arizona, through the desert with a bunch of other guys.
Keep marching through.
We had to be able to walk 8 miles with 100 pounds.
Wow.
And we got $2,500 for doing it. And this was in like 1972.
Really?
Something like that.
And then you're selling this stuff to who? Like, can you tell us some of the folks, or I mean,
Well,
people
that stuff, I wasn't selling that. That was a job for somebody. But the stuff that when I started bringing it in my 20s, it would go into Hollywood and all over California, because we were bringing in a couple thousand pounds at a time. And but it was back then it was different because it was pressed and most of it had seeds in it, and we were always striving to get the sensimilla or the seedless, right? And we were teaching people how to do that in the process. But what was amazing about Mexico is that cannabis has been in their culture for a long time down there, and the first real connoisseur things I learned about cannabis were there with these maestros de mota, right? And their understanding of the plant was deep because their cultural use of it was extensive. And so, I mean, down there, like when you rolled a joint, the selection of the bud that you would use to roll the joint was critical. It had to be the right dryness. The calyx or the individual flower had to be the right size. And then they had a technique and it took almost 20 minutes to clean enough of it to roll a joint. Like they wouldn't take it and mash it all up, right?
Right.
They would take it and touch the pointed tip of each calyx and pop it off. And not disturb it, right? Because the less you disturbed the calyx, the less you crush the trichomes that were on it.
Right. Handle with care.
Handle with care, and the more flavor and the more intense the effect, right? And we would have these really interesting. There was 3 guys that rolled joints. That one guy, it was his job. That was all he did. His name was Gasolino. He worked at a gas station, so they called him Gasolino. And they would say, "Una gasolino, por favor," right? One gasoline joint, por favor, right? And he would roll one of these things, and we would smoke it, and it was like, wow, that was special, that joint, right?
Yeah.
And then there was this guy from Mexico City, Napoleon, and he would roll one. And he was a frickin' artist, this guy. Like he would was a musician and an intellectual and a brilliant guy, and his would be a little bit better than Gasolino's. And then there was this Brujo, which is kind of a witch, that they have brujos and brujas in Mexico, and it's the cultural religion that kind of crosses Catholicism, right, in Oaxaca. And you see it manifest mostly during Dia de los Muertos in October, which is Halloween. But the brujo, so one day they had him come to do a ceremony for us, right, called Olympia, a cleansing ceremony.
Okay.
And so he brings a bundle of these herbs and a turkey egg and a bunch of stuff, and he comes in, and there's a whole bunch of us, some Canadian girls and some people from France and Germany and all these Mexicans and some Indians and my friends that I lived with, right? And the brujo would take some cannabis and prepare a joint, and we all smoked it. And he actually prepared a few of them, and his preparation was beyond perfect. It was like, holy shit, man! Like, this was incredible. Like, just the technique of his rolling of the joint made it exponentially stronger, right? So we smoked the joint, and then we start the process of doing the Olympia ceremony, which was, he would read a prayer before a little altar he set up with some holy water and an image of the Virgin Mary with a skeleton face, right? And then you would take the bundle of herbs and you would scrub yourself with it, right, and pass it to the next person. And then the turkey egg came, and he would cleanse himself with the turkey egg and pass it. And by the time the turkey egg gets back, the room just smells of the herbs that everybody's been scrubbing themselves with. And he drops the turkey egg in the glass of water, and the water boils. And you're going, what the fuck is that? And the Canadian girls, they're like, well, what are they going to ask us to do next? Take our clothes off, and it was mixed reactions going on in the room. But and afterwards, he breaks the egg and drops the yolk in the water, and he reads the yolk, and he tells you if the Olympia has been successful, right?
Wow.
In which our case it was. So there was this ongoing cannabis culture that was down there, an indigenous ethnobotanical culture in southern Mexico that
this is something I want to bring up because a lot of people think, courtesy of some folks holding public office now and generally racism in general, is that, the Mexicans use cannabis because they're a bunch of lazy stoners and they're just sitting around, and that's where it came from. But it's not. It goes back into, their history.
The thing is that a lot of Mexicans don't use cannabis. And culturally, it was the indigenous people that were using it, and not very many of them. And it was a subsistence crop that enabled them to feed their kids in the off season, right? And so these kind of survival crops, and you see them emerge in these agrarian cultures, in Afghanistan, India, China, all these kind of places where you have a struggling third world culture. This crop is the one that saves their asses, right? Because it's a hardy crop, it's in demand, it relieves all kinds of pain and suffering, and they can grow a lot of it and pay their bills, and their food crops often don't work out,
Yeah, because these are hardy, right? That's the other thing. You don't have to keep replenishing the soil, and that's incredible. It really is magic in a lot of ways. I used some heart magic, man, at the beginning of the show due to these knowledge points and Sam himself. Just before we get moving on, I do have to do a little plug here for the Source Turbo. I'm endorsing this thing. This is a turbo machine, the Extract Craft. Go to extractcraft.com and you'll see their cool little food processor looking deal. It's an updated design with improved processing time and added turbo mode. It's got altitude-specific tuning. What am I talking about? A smart, safe, and easy way to do at-home extraction. This is going to, you got to pay for the machine, but after that, you're controlling your own input into your body. So you have to source some good cannabis, such as we're hearing about now from Paul, and you have to do that, and you can make this stuff at home, and you can get away with it very easily. And I highly recommend, and I ask you, please don't participate in the rapacious money grab control paradigm of government-run cannabis stores. You're just going to be running into Monsanto weed and a bunch of bullshit anyway at a price they can't possibly tether. So get yourself a machine that can take cannabis, and in a very safe, clean, and easy way to use it, it uses vacuum and gentle warming to make extracts and concentrates. And it uses alcohol, but it does recover and reuse it, saving you a lot of money on that solvent. It pays for itself in a very short time. It's a fully enclosed, closed-loop system. It restricts odors to almost nothing, which is another great way to get away with this. Again, it's extractcraft.com. Check out the source. It's a machine that you will enjoy to help yourself use this particular substance, cannabis, and it's something that it's basically a tool. I'm going to say this is a tool to use a tool. Extractcraft.com. Look it up at your closest laptop, convenience, or phone. Extractcraft.com. I am definitely interested in that machine. I'm sure there are others similar to it, but I'm happy to know that people are learning now how to make their own stuff at home and to take their own power. I had to do that medically. This is for recreational, or it could be medically. I say there's really nothing in between those two other than the perception of other lawmakers. So getting back, Paul, to Mexico and these folks that use it, you say there's a very small section of the society that uses it. And I was just trying to make the distinction that it's not this, reprobate sitting around doing drugs, man, and marijuana, the way it was dubbed this by a North American, not a Mexican. And really, the knowledge of it through Mexico and people of South American extract that's going back is the indigenous history of using this as a medicine, as a food, as a paste, as a balm, as all kinds of things. And it got bastardized into believing that it's these terrible, Cheech and Chong type of Chicanos, man, doing this thing, And it really got that when it was starting to take off in the 70s, like when you're saying, that's when those albums were coming out and people were hearing that, the police were against it and that anybody using it was a bit of a reprobate.
Well, it was so bad in the States in the 60s that I was in junior high, and this was before I had any contact with drugs. And there had been a girl in my class that she was the first heroin addict I ever heard of, right? And
in high school?
In junior high.
Junior high.
I'm talking the 8th grade, right? And she had a party one weekend. And everybody went to it. I went to it. And there were people smoking pot there. And the next week, she had gotten busted over the weekend for heroin. And she ratted off everybody who was at her party. So we come to school on Monday morning, and they call us into the principal's office, everybody who was at this party. And the police are there. And they arrested us all for suspicion of having been in a place where marijuana was smoked, which was a felony.
That's huge.
Was a felony.
That's unbelievable.
And I was like, so I come in, I'm one of the last ones they bring in, and the cop's like, where are you at this party on da-da-da-da? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I couldn't remember the fucking weekend after it was over. Holy shit, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And they kept asking me the question. I kept like, I don't know. And one of the girls who was there, she was like, just tell him you were there. We were all there. And I was like, well, I guess I was there. She says so. And then I was all of a sudden under arrest. So, I mean, it was that freaking crazy, that you could be arrested for a felony that of having been in a place where marijuana had been smoked.
Yeah, that's unreal. And listen, when I was a kid at that age, I found it fascinating, even though I wasn't partaking. And of course, I heard of it because I used to watch the news, and I heard about another marijuana arrest. And I remember when Paul McCartney got arrested for it in Japan.
In Japan.
And you weren't allowed to have it there at all. But we weren't allowed to hear it here. But from a guy that wasn't in show business and just as a little kid, I thought it was, I never really got my head around until I was much older. And this particular aspect, and you were right in the middle of it, and this is it. On the one hand, you heard that it was dangerous and illegal, just like your story you told us about being associated in a room where someone might have used it. That's crazy. And then on the other hand, you had these famous people, these folks that we'd all listen to, or they were actors or comedians or what have you, and they were getting caught with it, and they were getting arrested with it. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you know, they're flying around, and they're doing their shows, they're singing their songs, telling their jokes. Whereas the other people that you hadn't heard of are presumably still doing time. So I don't know how that split was able to play out. It seemed like there were, once again, two laws for the famous and the rich and the not famous and the rich. Like, how does a guy get busted in Cleveland? He's coming back from Canada, say they're doing a gig in Cleveland or what have you. He gets arrested, and maybe the show gets canceled, maybe not. He still does the show. If he doesn't do it tonight, he does it tomorrow. And they just keep getting away with it. And that sort of was enticing to me as a young kid to go, I want to be on that team.
There was great lawyers involved in show business. Michael Stepanian in California, for sure, is probably one of the greatest lawyers of all time, and one of the founders of Normal. Bruce Margolin in Los Angeles, Michael Nassatir, Randy Sue Pollock. These people were all pioneer lawyers. And they represented musicians, that got in trouble in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and bailed them out of every kind of circumstance. I mean, when cannabis was just a big problem all the way around, because the bands took it on the road with them, and they were vulnerable to search by police anywhere they went. And then, we evolved through all that stuff, and look where it is now in the States.
Yeah.
In California, legal for recreational, and 1996 they went medical, and in 98 was when I got did my first legal medical grow there, but I'd already been growing it for more than 25 years
at that point.
And then, when I finally did get caught and go to prison and get deported back to Canada, and where it was evolving to, I from my point of view, I never understood that it was evolving into this medical thing, right?
Right.
And then when I finally started the process of getting diagnosed with cancer, like you, I had been a long time natural medicine person due to an allergy I had with a substance called gum arabic, which was the binding agent used in almost every pill, coloring in capsules, you name it. I couldn't
gum arabic. That's not something you can take in.
Not something I can take in. I couldn't eat an M&M without going into anaphylactic shock.
We just put it on your rider. You need one.
No M&Ms.
No M&Ms
with
this guy.
No Oreo cookies. So when I started the process of, and the interesting thing was the picture they used in the promo was in the beginning of stage of when I was getting diagnosed, and I'd gone out to Saskatchewan for my second winter out there, and I got diagnosed in Saskatoon.
Diagnosed with
prostate cancer.
What degree? Where were you with that?
I was a Gleason of 10.7.
Ooh.
My PSA was nothing even close to what yours got to. I was 12.7 at my highest.
12.7.
Which is, they consider it's full-blown cancer,
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't gonna do chemo from the very beginning when I started.
As soon as they told you. Said,
well, no. As soon as I started the process of doing continuous PSA tests, like every 2 weeks I was doing them. Right?
oh, right.
And my numbers went. I started at 6.7 and went to 12.7, right, in about 5 weeks.
Just kept climbing up one more.
Yeah. And so I left Ontario, went to Saskatchewan, got into a prostate cancer clinic there, and they did the biopsy and diagnosed it. And then they come and they give you your options, right? As you well know, they give you your list of shit sandwiches, and I had already started the ketogenic diet and gone vegan and started taking mushroom extracts and juicing turmeric root fresh and grating it into everything I ate. And turmeric root was actually the first thing that gave me any relief from the symptoms because it's such a great anti-inflammatory.
Right. This, again, is another plant.
Another plant.
Hello.
Yeah.
Another food.
And so by time I was heading back to Ontario in the spring, in February I got the final diagnosis. And then in April, I left to come back, and I talked to Tracy Lamore, who is my publicist and PR person, and also Sam's PR person.
Exactly. And when was this? What year was all this going on?
2005, 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
This is when you were diagnosed.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I told her, and because she does a lot of work in the cannabis community, I asked her. I said, "Look, I need to find somebody to get oil from." Because I want to do the oil treatment, and she said okay, and she set me up with Sam. So I go to Sam, and we sit and we talked for hours. I mean, it was just like it was like you and I, we hit it off, and a couple of ex-cons and cannabis dudes,
prison story. Hey, look at
we
this
got
tattoo.
our prison stories and shits, and so at the end of the conversation, he goes, "Wow," he goes, "You're the second most knowledgeable person about cannabis in Canada."
Wow. Him being the first.
And I laughed.
Yeah,
I was just like, okay, what? Yeah.
Wow.
I go, "Who's number one?" He goes, "Well, why?" I was, of course. What the fuck was I thinking? Right?
Was he in BC? He was living there when
No, this was out here. He had the place in BC though. So he started me out right away, and
tell us what that's like. Like, what was your intake when you say started out?
Well,
what was the prescription?
You know,
so to speak?
I was really scared. I'll tell you, it was because I'm one of those people who, at the time, couldn't eat a cookie. Right, like I would frickin' get the spins and hit the floor.
Right.
I could smoke a truckload of weed, but eat one. No,
different, yeah.
Totally different.
Goes right to the bloodstream, yeah.
So, I didn't know about the 11-hydroxy metabolite that your liver puts out and things like that, but makes it stronger. So, so Sam coaches me and tells me what to expect, and I start doing a suppository of a small gelatin cap every night before I go to bed, about an hour, and it was, it was really strong, like I although I wasn't getting the spins and hitting the deck with it, right?
Yeah, it's a different feeling of high.
Yeah,
depending on where
totally
how you take it in.
Totally different. And taking it rectally, you really get your bang for the buck. I mean, it's but it was all happening while I was asleep, and I was sleeping like a train wreck, man. It was incredible. So, and your best healing happens while you're sleeping. So that first 3 weeks though was like the Twilight Zone. I'll tell you, it was. I would get up at 6 and I'd sit down by the computer, and all of a sudden it's 4:30. What happened? Right?
He lost track of time.
Like,
just 8 hours. That's all.
It's like I just sat down. Yeah.
Oh man.
And but after 3 weeks, nothing. Zip. Couldn't get high on anything.
Yeah.
And that was when I got to the full gram dose a day.
And you weren't getting high.
wasn't getting high on
See, this is
anything.
what I want to. Let's just put a bookmark in here for a second. And these are fascinating stories. I think we've already kind of talked about it a little bit. We have, and we've decided you need to come back more. We've got so much ground to cover, and it's it's a long show, and it's still not enough time. But this is something I want any of the listeners to understand, whether you're an advocate or a user or not, and especially the skeptical ones. Is so you've just heard Paul explain that at the very beginning he was taking these small amounts and getting completely off of his face and going into a spin and sleeping, and the next thing you know, he's taking a gram a day, which is a rather large amount of oil, and he's fine. And I've experienced this same thing. This is the way it goes. Your tolerance increases. Similarly, with alcohol, there's always that one guy at the bar that can have 5 more drinks than you and still, not fall on his face the way you do. And so this is what makes it very painful to me to understand that without going into the science, without going into the research that's available, some of it showing how great it is since the 30s, how they can just and I mean the states and the police just arbitrarily throw up, okay, you got this stuff in your system, you're high. You had a little bit in your system and you were off your face. Now you have a whole bunch in your system weeks later and you don't even get a buzz out of it. But if you tested positive on either one of those, that guy is going to go to jail for the rest of his life. This guy might get a ticket. It doesn't make sense. They're not using science. Whenever they've had science before, like the Ledane Commission or what have you, through the past, they just blow it off and they use it. They put it aside and they will shape this punitive, restrictive policy around it forever. There are so many footnotes in here that I was able to draw attention to. But going back into your time as a younger man in California and providing, cannabis to the stars and the bands and etc., how do you're an older man than myself, how do you see that same trope over and over again without getting so sick of it and fed up with it? I mean, it just never changes.
Well, we would say every year it was, oh, well, it'll be legal in 5 years. Right. We've been saying that since the 60s.
Yeah.
And so it really, to say it was frustrating was an understatement, but the kind of perseverance that cannabis users have in the face of the adversity of the whole situation is commendable. We don't give up. We use our brains to think and progress in a logical manner to accomplish our goals. And that's one of the things when you're reading Sam's book that you see, like Sam went through a lot of really crazy, scary shit, being an Italian guy, in an immigrant family here in Canada. Sure. And all the things that he was associated with. And I can't get over the story about Pablo Escobar handing him the gun.
Pablo Escobar, yeah, that's all in here. Yeah,
this book is incredible. You got to read this book.
But it seems like such a tiny clique of control masters make sure that the masses of us, the awakened of us, the people from the elevated place that have tried it, tested it, read about it, understand it, have the right to do that anyway, particularly when it helps you out physically. And they just keep calling the shots. I mean, there I was shouting down the premier of this province, basically obfuscated with well, keep talking about it later. Just thank you very much and sit down. And of course, they don't, right? No. They bring in more pressure.
They're trying to protect a lot of things, though. It's like all right, you got Big Pharma here that's gonna lose their asses on this legalization thing because people don't take aspirin anymore. They don't take Tylenol, ibuprofen, and rightfully so. I mean, people don't realize that 15,000 people die from taking Tylenol every year. It's like when you get cancer, one of the things that I recommend to everybody is, first of all, you do your due diligence, right? And you got to understand the basics of cancer and how it works. And the fact that genetic cancer is very rare. The actual phenomena of real genetic cancer is a very rare thing.
But it's widely believed by most people that, oh, your dad had this, you'll have this.
Well, yeah,
people-
and sure, and I've seen that. One the thing that probably affected me most in the whole process was that when I got diagnosed, eight of my friends were diagnosed with cancer.
Wow.
A business partner and a client, in amongst them. My business partner, who was instrumental in getting Phil his star on Canada's Walk of Fame, Angel Rosenthal from Chicago. She got diagnosed with cancer. Her first chemo treatment killed her. Happens to 2%. Nobody tells you this shit, right? Okay, so the next one, a client, a musician, a brilliant guy, part of a writing team from Norway, John Ravneg and Geir Wergersen. John Ravneg was the lyricist for this duo. These guys are like the Lennon and McCartney of Scandinavia. They had a band called De Presleys. He gets, fair-skinned guy, gets a skin cancer, goes into his lymph nodes in his neck. We think, holy shit, the lymph nodes are around his vocal cords.
Right.
He's never going to sing again, right? He didn't make it a year. Another friend had a spot on his lung, had it removed. It was cancer. Opted to do preventative chemotherapy. And again, you got to read the drug interaction warnings on everything that you are thinking about doing, because all chemotherapies cause a secondary cancer. His just happened to be a hereditary one because his sister had died from it. Both his mother and father had died of liver cancer. They gave him the chemotherapy that gave him liver cancer. Everything metastasized, spread to his bones and his neck. They took out vertebrae. The guy was dead in less than a year. I didn't have anybody except for one person I knew that made it 14 years. Tammy Ramson, just a beautiful woman, stage 4 breast cancer for 14 years. They did everything on earth to this woman. She had taken so much chemo and radiation that her bones crystallized.
Wow.
And she would walk and break bones. And I mean, just in a phenomenal amount of pain and the suffering that she went through. And at that point, the people still weren't thoroughly aware of how to use cannabis oil properly to treat stuff like this, and lots of things trying to repress it and keep it in the dark, and then people like Sam pushing it into the light, and so that the friends and loved ones we've lost along the way to it. I never dreamed when Bob Marley said that cannabis is for the healing of the nation, that it literally was for the healing of the nation. Like, we didn't understand that. That was actual prophecy,
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people might be listening right now saying, this guy is full of shit. Chemo causes cancer? What are you talking about? Come on. So let's go to some fake news. Here's something from the National Enquirer. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually from ncbi.nlm.nih, National Institute of Health.gov. Here it is. Chemotherapy causes cancer. Exclamation point. Says it right on the report. They're actually using grand punctuation such as this. A case report of therapy-related acute myeloid leukemia in early-stage breast cancer. So this is just one example. Use of chemotherapy and radiotherapy in the adjuvant setting has improved survival for many patients with malignancy. This is what they say. Unfortunately, multimodality treatment can come at a price, in particular therapy-related malignancies. Say that again. Therapy-related malignancies. This has importance in that patients must be made aware of this potential detriment from therapy, and doctors must consider this diagnosis in those patients who are cancer survivors and presenting with health problems. We present a case report, and it's all below here, and a brief overview of the literature regarding chemotherapy-induced acute leukemia. following therapy for early-stage breast cancer. You really have to do a little reading. You have to do a little spending of the time and say, hey, tell me all my options, doc. Tell me what you've got. Give me all my numbers. I want all the hard lab data for sure, but I need more. I need more data from you before I fully decide to make a decision. I can't even believe the saga that I had once sitting at a guy's desk, and he's saying, "Are you going to take this or not?" I said, "What's in it?" He goes, "You have to tell me whether you're going to take it before I can tell you what's in it."
Oh my God. Huh?
Oh God.
The scary thing is when you look and again, the doctors here in Canada are only allowed to tell you what the approved treatments are, right?
Right.
They can't tell you, oh yeah, go out and do cannabis. That's not how they do it here, right? Our whole process of even getting to a cannabis doctor is kind of odd. Like we have our family doctor. We say, we would like a referral to a doctor for an evaluation.
Right.
To see if cannabis could help me. So your doctor makes an appointment for you with a cannabis doctor. And then the process goes from there. So it's difficult to watch people around you suffer and go through these things. And when you've been given a second lease on life, so to speak, as you and I have, we look at one of the great problems is people don't do their due diligence, right? They get a disease, they surrender themselves to a doctor. And because the doctor in our minds is the know-all, cure-all, and he's going to do the thing that is the best for us. Well, when everybody's on the big pharma tit, they're only going to do what's good for big pharma. And if all their options are just big pharma options, then you can look at statistics like this, and cancer statistics are very skewed. And it goes back to the very beginning. When you do your due diligence on cancer in your personal study, you find Dr. Otto Warburg, right, who got the Nobel Prize in 1931 for discovering the cause of cancer, poor oxygenation of the cell. Wow, that's interesting. Poor oxygenation of the cell. How does that happen, right? That's your next stage in the process. Wow, it happens lots of different ways. It happens when your body isn't throwing off toxins. Your kidneys and your liver are overburdened and you're not removing things, and the cells get polluted. It also happens when the body's pH becomes so acid that it sets up a circumstance where it's advantageous to cancer cells. The next thing that happens is excess sugar in the body. You have too much sugar in the body, you're too acid, cells are starving for oxygen, and all of a sudden they do something that is very odd. They are programmed to survive, right? Every cell in the body is programmed to survive. And so it's deprived of oxygen, it's taking in excess sugar in an effort to combat the lack of oxygen. The sugar ferments in the cell and further distresses the cell and causes it to do something that's very unusual. It becomes fully differentiated from what it was and turns to cancer and starts to grow out of control. And that's how it starts, right? Now, there's different ways that deoxygenation of the cell happens. It can happen from chemical pollutants. It can happen from viruses. Viruses do the same thing, especially superbug and stealth viruses. They block the ability of the cell to handle oxygen. I discovered this about my prostate, that every time a virus hit me, my PSA numbers went up, right? And that I thought that was really interesting, and that's one of the flaws in the PSA test is that right. A lot of times guys don't have prostate cancer, they have a prostate infection.
Right, or prostatitis or some condition.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so you get a misdiagnosis there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of homework you have to do, you know, and then you can determine your approach to how you're going to do it. And we had been talking about the ketogenic diet, you and I, and this was one of the things that Sam stressed a lot was like, you know, you got to equalize the playing field with the cancer. You take away what it likes. So
Right.
you remove everything that creates glucose in your system from your diet. You're no longer living on a carbohydrate charge, right? And you're making the transference of your body feeding on healthy fats. You try to eliminate as much of the animal protein as possible. It acidifies your system and makes it more advantageous for cancer as well.
So if fat is your fuel, what are you eating? I mean, you're not eating butter because that's from a cow. You're not eating
you know
cheese.
what?
What
I ate a little bit of butter and a little bit of cheese. Just then butter is one of the best fats for you.
But
there
as a
is.
ketogenic diet item, you would eat butter?
I would eat a little butter. Yeah,
Well-
I tried to get a very big mix of fats. Right.
So what's dinner? Give me an example of what
Well,
that would...
my dinner every meal was a big salad. A
Okay.
huge freaking
Oh, okay.
salad
So there's
with
no
a
fat in there. That's just...
well, the fat came from olive oil, hemp seed oil, nuts,
Okay.
nuts, seeds, a little grated
Okay.
blue cheese maybe or something,
Sure.
just a touch, you know,
Yeah.
to get
To
you
appease the taste buds.
to appease the fat fairy, right? The
Right.
cheese fairy, the dairy fairy.
You take coconut butter at all?
I did coconut too, like whatever I could get a healthy fat from that
Okay.
wasn't an animal product, right?
Let me read from Sam's book here.
Yeah.
You know, because this is all bullshit, right? I mean, this is just an anecdote you're throwing out here.
Yeah.
Says here that thanks to Paracelsus, he was around a while ago, and the ensuing age of enlightenment, cannabis made a triumphant return to Western medicine. Right down to the end of the 19th century, cannabis and science journeyed hand in hand. Advances in... I'm saying this because people ask, you know, what? Oh, come on. It does all these things? How can it do that? You're just high in your perception. No. Advances in anatomy and surgery showed that cannabis was useful as an anesthetic, an analgesic, an anti-inflammatory, an antispasmodic. Every medical school taught its students about cannabis, both in Europe and North America. An Irish doctor in India, William O'Shaughnessy, in the 1830s. And this makes me laugh when I read stuff like this. It makes me pissed off. It makes me happy. All of that goes on at the same time when I read that a guy 170 years ago, or whatever it is, demonstrated that cannabis okay, so that's not an anecdote. He demonstrated that cannabis had a medicinal effect on cholera, tetanus, and infant epilepsy, which has been, you know, more latter-day evidence of that in some of the guests I've had on the show and some of the kids you can see on YouTube just crushing their epilepsy with cannabis usage. An English doctor in London, John Clendinning, declared cannabis superior for treatment of all psychological diseases. He doesn't say one or the other. He doesn't pick a couple. He says all psychological illnesses. A priest named Robert Burton heralded cannabis the antidote for melancholy. Not prayer, not fasting, this particular fellow, but cannabis. The Queen Victoria's personal doctor, J.R. Reynolds, in the 1890s. So that's 60 years on from this previous thing. He was the Surgeon General. He wrote in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, quote, "In almost all painful maladies, I have found cannabis by far the most useful of drugs." Why do people making legislation now pretend like this stuff isn't around? Dr. Reynolds was a pioneer of mental health and demonstrated that cannabis could mitigate dementia. Now, it sounds to me like a lot of these folks making the laws and the ones giving the tickets out and taking you to court need this substance. It should be some kind of mandatory cannabis ingestion plan.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's amazing that we're having these same arguments over and over again in the face of all the research that has been done in Israel and in Spain and now there's more than 100 studies here and you know when you start into the process of using cannabis oil to treat something like cancer, the funny thing is that you experience many different levels of what it can do. you experience what it can do as a metabolism regulator. Like, I weighed 217 pounds when I started the ketogenic diet and the cannabis oil treatment. And by the time I was done, I weighed 172, which was what I weighed in high school, and I felt like frickin' Superman.
Right.
I felt so incredible. I had also experienced the anti-inflammatory aspect of it. It's the most powerful anti-inflammatory you can take.
Yeah.
And one of the first places I noticed it was the lack of swelling in the cerebral cortex of your brain.
For headaches?
Well,
or what do you mean?
What we don't realize is that when we're being bombarded constantly by stealth viruses from the environment, from water and food and all kinds of things, some of these viruses get inside the blood-brain barrier, and as they're dying off from the immune system ramping up, they put out a neurotoxin. The neurotoxin causes anger, fear, depression, and apathy. So 3 weeks in to my cannabis oil treatment, all the inflammation in my brain disappears. And all of a sudden, it's like somebody took and cleaned the garage, and you go and you park an empty brand new car in it. And
So
you're
what
like,
you're saying is cannabis is bad for your brain. That's what you're trying. Okay, next. I mean, that's all they hear. That it affects your brain at all would be
Well,
a
and
no-no.
yeah, and then when you see, and then you start looking at, oh wow, it works good on kids that have seizures. You go,
Yeah.
the lack of inflammation again is going from the brain, and it gets rid of helps mitigate the plaque that builds up for people with Alzheimer's and stuff like that. These are metabolism regulating things that we don't even think about. It's the same for diabetes, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I lost all this weight. Wow, so this is what it does: is it resets the way our body functions, and it's almost like rebooting it.
Well, you lost a lot of weight there.
Yeah.
You did. But there are also people who aren't weighing enough, and the cannabis will bring them up to the same kind of
regulates
level.
their metabolism the other way.
Yeah.
It brings you back into natural balance with your system, right? So I went back to what my body's natural weight should be, right?
Right. That's incredible. So this is the kind of thing. I talked about this earlier on the show. Just to throw back, the folks listening already know this, but there's this article here that says, research lacking on medical marijuana. New prescription guidelines suggests. While enthusiasm is very strong, good quality research has not caught up. It's more like the reportage of the hidden available research has not caught up.
Well, one of the problems in the United States and Canada is that we don't recognize research from anybody else.
That's true,
right?
too, yeah.
Oh, well, the research wasn't done here.
Right.
I tried to import some agricultural products into Canada, humic acid and fulvic acid, right?
Oh, right. Good stuff.
Very important stuff for plants. And at the time, it was on the approved chemical list for organic farming here. But they had not had any university studies that proved anything with it, so you couldn't actually legally sell it. And it was like, excuse me? That puts Canada 50 years behind the times, agriculturally speaking.
Yeah. And they have that same equation. It's like, it doesn't work. And you say, no, it does. They say, there's no research. You say, let's do something. They go, you can't because it's illegal, and you're back to the top of the...
Another classic example is bioremediation. Things that break down toxic chemicals in the environment, hydrocarbons, oil, things like that. Mushrooms, yeah. In the United States, there's a company that makes bacteria that eat pollutants. Now, which means that you can bioremediate gas station soil on site by just treating it with these freeze-dried blocks of bacteria that when they get wet, they go into the soil and they eat the hydrocarbons. And when the hydrocarbons are gone, the native bacteria eats them and they're gone. That's it.
Perfect. Or you could just dump Corexit all over the Deepwater Horizon spill and watch it ruin everything.
Yeah.
So okay, let's get into a little bit. We still have some time left, even though we obviously need more time together on these topics. Let's talk about what it does to your brain, not just in an anti-inflammatory sense, but in the folks that shout this down as an effective means, it's always about fear. It's always about it's going to ruin your brain, and that you shouldn't do it till you're 24. And there's certain timelines and rules and strictures. If we can just peel that back for a second, you've just shown, and I understand this as well, the anti-inflammatory aspect is amazing. But what else does it actually do to your brain that can help you? Because what I'm saying is, I'm not a scientist, but I have experienced realizations and awarenesses, certain thoughts that seem to come from nowhere, and then you find out that they are backed up. I've got about half a dozen incidents in here where this doctor, who I don't take anything away from his research ability, but I came across these same things. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago. It was last week. Dr. Michelle Ross, and she's got a book called Vitamin Weed. And this is something that kind of came to me. I was like, this is a food. Now, quickly, if you imagine someone with a horrible case of scurvy, which is usually a result of a lack of vitamin C, and you could find someone to get a very bad case of scurvy, and then you took citrus and the citrus plant and everything that's great about vitamin C, and you were able to concentrate that down similarly to this oil we use for cannabis, how fast would that citrus get to the teeth and the gums and restore that? Probably more quickly than just eating sections of orange once in a while, because it's concentrated, right? So it does do these things. These concentrated food patterns, these food substances do things to us. Any good food is going to improve you or worsen you if it's terrible. So that's what this is doing. But this thing about the brain starting to realize things, starting to get ideas that other people had that are long buried knowledge, I think this is one of the key reasons, and it'll never be stated, why they put this barrier in front of us from accessing this thing in the first place.
Well, when I think one of the big disconnects for people is that they aren't connected to the plants that give us substance and life, right? Like, we have a disconnect to food, and there was a time and period when you used to hear people say, "You are what you eat," and food is your medicine, right? And that's real stuff. I mean, diet and we're chemical factories, right? We're these biological chemical factories, and we stuff things into it.
And it changes it to something else, and your ATP
breaks
builds
it
up.
Down. Yeah, exactly. And if you don't put quality things in, you don't get quality reactions, right?
Right.
And so, it comes around to food quality and diet and all kinds of different behaviors. And then genetics comes into the picture too, because we all have a genetic predisposition for something that is ultimately going to take us out, right? And so what we learn in this cannabis journey is that we have evolved alongside this plant, and we have specific things inside us that lead us to this plant. Matter of fact, most animals have an endocannabinoid system.
That's true. Yeah.
Cats, dogs. My cat loves to eat a fresh ganja leaf off a plant. And it's quite good for dogs who have inflammation. CBDs are great for them. And also dogs that have seizures, that THC actually works on them too. So it's, we have to make this reconnect to the plants that are out there for us, because first of all, one of the things that happens with all pharmaceuticals is that your body views them as a foreign substance, right?
Sure.
And they
Carries a toxic load. It can ruin your liver taking opioids.
Your liver, your kidneys. They cause actual inflammation in the body. Your body has to figure out a way how to get these chemicals out of the body. Processing it through the kidney and the livers may not be the decision that your body wants to make. Maybe it's going to store it somewhere in other tissue. These consequences all manifest themselves as we get older, right? and the body becomes less firm and has less ability to deal with getting rid of toxins. So we understanding how your body works and the relationship between different approaches of medicine are as great as the diversity between Eastern and Western medicine. I mean, the Chinese have been treating ailments for 3,000 years compared to our over 250 years here with Western medicine.
But we have copped the term mainstream medicine, and they are alternative medicine, even though we are the alternative to this ancient medicine.
Yeah, the alternative medicine debunk is, one of their favorite things is to call natural doctors quacks, right? And trying to degrade their position. I mean, now there's so much good data about natural medicine. A lot of people aren't aware of this study. There's something called the China study.
Can I just hang on a second before we get to the China study? Because this is great. I didn't know we were going to go here, but I would like to say that we have this book. We're giving some of them away. You should get one. If you don't win this contest I'm about to describe, go to the store and buy one anyway. And even if you do win the contest, go to the store and buy one and give it to a friend of yours. You can't believe the information that's available in this book. We don't have time to go through it all right now, but you want to have this. You want to have this fantastic book. And to do that, go to our socials, Green Crush Pod, at Green Crush Pod. We're on Instagram. We're on the Facebooks and the everything else is in Twitter. So go there. Also, hashtag I support Jenny Hallam. She was on the show earlier freaking out because the government's going crazy doing these awful things to her. And she is really a warrior. My hat is off to her. She's an incredible woman. So just wanted to cut in there before we finish the show. Book giveaway. And we also have another giveaway for a box of cool stuff. It's a ritual box provided to us by last week's guest, Nathan. I'm sorry. Nathan Woodworth. There it is. I don't always remember the name. He's not sitting right there in front of me. So check that out. It's a nice box. I took a picture of it. Usually Kim takes pictures of that kind of stuff, but I had to do that. So you can win that. You can win this book, and you should win both, and definitely try. So now let's go back to the China.
The China study. You know, I came across this by accident. It was a documentary, and it was these doctors, Western doctors, were starting a study about cancer. And of course, China has the largest population on the planet that you could hope to do a study in. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was they took a map of China and they took all this information they had about what kind of cancers happened where in China. And they got these doctors from the West hooked up, and they took all the data and information they had. And parts of China have become very westernized. The diet, everything. They eat all the same junk food we do.
Hot dogs and relish
they
and
got
amber, all that.
McDonald's and everything, right? And in those areas, they started to see different health issues coming up that were similar to health issues in America, in North America, right? And then the areas where it was more vegetarian, less so, right? And they started to figure out how diet plays into this whole thing, because they all of a sudden had access to millions upon millions of people to use as the data they needed. And if you do a search on this, you'll come up with a documentary about it, and it's just a brilliant film.
So what are the greater implications of this study?
The greater implications are that, you know, the less animal products you are inclined to eat, the less cancer there is, you know, and the less other illness issues, right?
Isn't this why those Texas meat purveyors tried to sue Oprah or something? She was saying something like this in the early aughts. They freaked out. She lost a lawsuit against them for saying a fact.
Yeah, those kind of things, they call them slap suits, and it's based on who has the most money wins, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the whole battle over diet and meat and stuff is, like I eat meat, but I lean toward vegetarian diet most of the time, and I
Yeah.
save those things as a treat.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to eat meat. We ate meat, and we would eat meat 3 times, maybe 4 times a week, and that would be
Yeah.
like bacon on Saturday morning, right?
Yeah,
Probably,
yeah.
and maybe a roast or a meatloaf on Sunday night.
Yeah, and
And
then
from
your
this,
chicken
you'd
was
have a
in
couple
there
of
somewhere.
sandwiches. You'd have
Yeah.
a chicken, and that would be it. And the
Yeah.
rest of the time, there was soup and sandwiches and salads and pastas and this and
Yeah.
that. And I don't understand why people don't understand that. That was kind of the normal diet. You have a certain amount of that stuff, and it lasts in your body for a while, and then you replenish it. But the way we live now with this cash-driven, money-driven, commerce-driven society, you need to get up in the morning and hit a drive-through restaurant on your way to work to get some kind of a sandwichy muffin kind of thing with some sort of pork version in there, and then
Oh.
it's off to lunch. It's KFC, and then later on it's a pizza, and
Yeah,
then
total disconnect from our
Wendy's is
food and-
open till 3 in the morning drive-through, and you're
Yeah.
eating meat like 6 times a day.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think that, even if you're a meat eater, I don't think you should eat it as much as the advertising company spreadsheet would prefer.
Well, it's the North American thing. More is more, right? I mean, it kind of was how our mode of operation here in North America has always been. Our measure of wealth is how much meat we eat. That was one of the things that happened during the Second World War. There wasn't meat in England and
Yeah.
France and those places. The soldiers got it all, and they ate their horses, and they did this and that. And it turns out you only need 10% protein in your diet. And you look at how I always go back to the Chinese and how they ate, and the Asians, because they treat meat like it's a condiment.
Right.
Rather than the main thing, right? And they always put a lot of vegetables in with it. And I remember reading, we went through all the diets in the hippie days. Phil was the first vegetarian I ever met.
Wow.
And his first diet was the macrobiotic diet.
Okay.
Which was a Japanese diet developed by a guy named George Osawa. And macrobiotics has to do with eating foods that are indigenous to your environment but are pure foods, and eating a lot of vegetables in conjunction with them, and all whole organic things, and a lot of brown rice, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, the next diet was Arnold Ehret's mucusless diet healing
Right.
system, right? And then there was Food Combining Made Easy by Dr. Herbert Shelton, which dealt with what foods you should eat together and how they affected your digestion and stuff
Right.
like that. So, and then you had the yoga diets, what yogis ate, and their diets were very unusual. Some of them only ate chicken. Some of them lived on milk. Some of them lived off the air, the pollen in the air. The great book Paramahansa Yogananda's Diary of a Yogi is a wonderful book.
Well, this all comes back down to self-empowerment, right? I mean, don't
Yeah.
let an advertising company tell you what you're supposed to eat every day, and
Yeah.
get like you say, your own due diligence. You have to find things out. I had to find things out and learn how not to see if there was an option, and I felt that there was to not die. To get a year given to you and say, hurry up and get your affairs in order. And internally, I was wrestling with, I don't know if this is denial, where I just don't want to hear this bad news and I'm going to die horribly anyway, or it actually had a sense of like, no, that's not, he's only telling me 4 things, and there were more things out there.
What's incredible is that in your story is how bad your illness got.
That is,
and
yeah.
how far you came back. I mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely astounding in terms of what, 99% of the people who get a stage 4 cancer diagnosis are dead
Yeah.
in the year.
But most of them try things that are offered to them by their doctor. I consider myself blessed because I've been through a lot of things in my life. I almost drowned at sea with another comic, Craig Campbell. Too many car crashes, and after a while, I started to realize, like, if I'm not getting some kind of a spiritual hand somehow, I'm just super lucky. And I feel like I'm either spiritually blessed or lucky, don't get hung up on it, that I was not given the option to do chemo. Because like you, I wasn't going to do it either. I didn't want it. And I thought, I'm going to just ride this out the best I can without it. And then they didn't even offer it as an option. And then I was like, oh, hang on a minute. What do you mean I'm not eligible for it? That's kind of scary.
The scary thing is you look at the statistics of how cancer plays out, right? And okay, so in my life, 100% of the people who chose the traditional treatments died. Okay, that's in my personal life.
Yeah.
That's my personal experience of what I've seen, right? So I look at, and then you go in and you look at actual cancer statistics. Okay, so and they've now changed this. They've lowered it from 5 to 3 years. If you make it 5 years, that's considered cured, right?
Right.
Now it's just 3 years. Okay, so you take 100% of the people who take this treatment. What is the percentage that are going to make it 5 years? Well, that's only 30%.
Wow, yeah.
So of that 30%, actually only about 20% of them are going to make it 3 years. The ones that make it the 5 in remission, the rate of failure after 5 years is 80%.
Is that why they reined it into 3 years to get people to get a higher win stat?
To change the view of the statistic. It's statistic skewing, as they call it, right? And so, all right, so now you have, so with it changing to 3 years, you've bumped it up to 40% or something, but you still have the 80% failure rate of remission. And for a lot of people, it happens after 3 years. And for 20%, it happens at 5. The ones that happen at 5, the ones that make it 2 years beyond that is 5%. The ones that make it another 2 years is less than 2. So, off 2% out of 98% of the total is what they base their whole marketing scam on, right? And you don't realize this until you start looking at the numbers in depth and you see how they play it out. A lot of it's done by most people who die of cancer die of some secondary thing.
Where did you get those numbers?
Oh, personal research, just going over study after study.
Some of them are governmental?
Yeah, a lot of them are governmental.
Okay.
Well, all death statistics that I found were governmental.
The best kind.
I would go and I would say, what cancer do people die from here, right?
Yeah.
And you can see like things around nuclear power plants. It's always got a spike,
Sure.
right? It'll be 80% above national average kind of deal, right? And wherever, like you look at Hamilton. Hamilton is a place that has
Steel
radical
town.
steel
Yeah,
town.
sure.
You got heavy metals. You've got smelting. You've got all the industrial pollutants in the air. You got heavy cancer, right? You also got Parkinson's and Alzheimer's really heavily in those areas, right? And you can, all these statistics are available. The people just need to go and look at them.
Take a look.
And it's kind of easy stuff to figure out because you know how they're playing the game. You know that everything's a marketing scheme for these pharmaceutical companies. I mean, you look at the advertising that's on TV. Like they advertise these drugs that they're trying to hype people, and then they have the disclaimer that goes on for longer than the length of the actual
Right.
commercial.
Oh, it's like 5
and
minutes.
You're like, geez, well, why don't you just give me a gun and I'll kill myself?
That's
holy
unbelievable.
shit.
Well, we've heard a lot of great things about football players. I don't know if you watch the NFL. Obviously, you've heard of it, and these guys are cracking their heads together all the time. Sure, they wear helmets, but their brains are slamming around, and you could never smoke a joint. There were always bad people smoking joints and taking cannabis. Now they're finding this is great for CTE and helping those guys out. They don't necessarily have to die of a heart attack at 55.
Yeah.
And now from marijuanamoment.net, this came out last week. It says here that the union that represents professional basketball players think they should be able to use medical marijuana without being punished for it for the NBA. I don't think they take as much head slamming in that sport, but they think it's a good idea in a national sport. This is a big deal, I think, in moving forward when a big body such as the NFL, the NBA.
Well, I mean, if anybody needs those kind of anti-inflammatories, those guys do. I mean, think about their knees and holy shit, basketball. It's got to be rough on the knees.
Oh yeah,
all that
brutal
stuff they do.
on the knees.
Football, holy God! I mean, those guys are practically crippled when their careers are over.
The immune system. It's a series of pieces and bits. You could pull it out. You could extract that from the human body, just like the circulatory system, etc. The immune system is actually connected to the brain. There are different pieces of the brain, the cerebellum and the frontal cortex and all of these different pieces. I'm not obviously I'm not a brain surgeon, but there you go. And so when you're using, this is something that came to me, and I've yet to find it in the book, but I'm sure it's in there, and I wonder if you can speak to this at all. So like you say, I was my doctor last year in April, he called me his only Lazarus. He said, I asked him about why I was doing so well, and he said, I've had people not as bad as you get not as good as you're at right now. The arc on your journey is incredible. You were way down here, now you're way up here. And it happened twice. And he called me his only Lazarus. And a lot of the thinking and the ideas that I've been able to come up with and this isn't any kind of braggadocio. I'm saying these are thoughts that have come in because I've been using this substance and focusing on it. And so going back to this thing, the immune system is connected to the brain. If you're firing up your immune system and you're using this cannabis substance to turn things around for your immune system to do its job and to eliminate these problems, that to me is hand in hand with the fact that you're improving the circulation and the use of the brain. You can't just be improving your immune system and your brain sitting over here not picking up any of that benefit. So when you're firing the whole thing up, it's like a rusty old engine. You might have an old rusty tractor in your barn, and look at this thing, doesn't even run, until you start shaving off some of the rust and maybe change a couple of parts and lube it up, and then the next thing you know, it's running again, And I really feel that has happened. And, of course, I can't document any of this. I don't have any solid evidence to this fact.
You can't separate all the systems in the body, right?
Right.
They all work together, right?
Yeah.
And so, symptomatic diagnosis is not the best way to diagnose something, right? Like they do their blood work, and a lot of it's based on chemistry, and I'll give you an example. When we test for hepatitis C, we test for 6 kinds. That doesn't take into account the over 270 kinds of superbugs of Hep C.
How many kinds?
Over 275 kinds.
We're all doomed.
Well,
with that number.
Ultimately, we are doomed. But these are the kind of things that in science, as we progress and our ability to measure things improves, we've actually disproved some of Einstein's theories. Only because at the time of his theory, he was limited in his scientific ability to measure something, right?
Yeah.
And as time evolves and our ability to measure things becomes more accurate or goes to a new level of measurement, we perceive things differently. And that's going to be how it is till the end of time, right? we also, in a culture, in Chinese medicine, all the systems work together and they have an ability to measure them all. In acupuncture, every system and organ system in your body has a pulse that is measurable. And when a Chinese doctor takes your pulse, he's not just measuring the pulse of your heart, but he's measuring the pulse of your kidneys, your liver, your spleen, and on and on, and we have to view these things as working in harmony together to achieve any superior level of health. And this is where the simple chemistry of diet comes in, proper exercise. I had a friend in Laguna Beach got diagnosed with leukemia, and this was way. I might have been 21 when this happened. The guy went out, became a marathon runner, and didn't take any treatment from the doctors. Just started running.
Yeah.
His leukemia vanished. Years later, I think about reading Dr. Otto Warburg's thing about oxygenation.
Right.
Running, forced oxygenation of
Bang,
the
bang,
system.
bang. You're pumping it in like crazy.
Leukemia is gone.
Sure.
Like, what the hell? So is it that simple? I mean, and in some cases it is, right? And in your case, more complex, and mine not as complex as yours. But we have to take a whole bunch of things and harmonize them together at the same time. And those are the kind of things that in my treatment with Sam, he always stressed, like, keep on top of the diet, no alcohol, no this, starve the cancer, feed
I think it's
your
Western
body.
world. Is it maybe in the Western society things seem to be focused on point by point by point. Like, for example, when I was vegetarian and vegan years ago, people would say to me all the time, I would get this response: well, why are you doing it? Is it for your health, or is it for the animals, or is it, and you start to realize, why do you have to pick one reason? Why is there one reason why a person would do this? To me, it became something like, what's the most important spoke on a bicycle wheel? Well, they all need to be there, and they all need to be properly tightened and tuned, and you don't just have 2 or 3 spokes.
Yeah.
And I started doing it initially for health reasons, and then as I was working my way through understanding what a vegetarian, then eventually what a vegan is, I started to get other benefits out of it, and that's when I realized it's not just for one reason. There's a lot of different reasons.
The things you learn about your body and how it works is, it's like if you think you have an allergy to something, eliminate that thing, see what happens. And your body will react, and it's about paying attention. We get so disconnected from our bodies that, whenever you see somebody who's gotten very fat, that's happened over a long period of time. And they don't perceive the changes that are happening in their system often because they're too wound up in making a living and paying taxes or raising kids or whatever, right? They lose that connection, right? And the whole thing is coming back to being grounded and staying connected to ourselves and our body, and interpreting the things that our body tells us. We evolved alongside this plant that gives us knowledge. It really does. And that was one of the things in the process of gardening and farming. Every plant and everything I learned to grow taught me something. And so there is knowledge to be gained from everything. Your food is knowledge. These are things that feed you and feed the chemistry system of your body and enable it to function at whatever level of function it is. You put junk food in your body, you're not going to get the best output, right?
Yeah.
You put good quality materials in a system that is a chemistry system, you get good quality output.
That's true. I just read something recently about Pringles chips and how additionally terrible they are for you compared to potato chips, which are already heralded as one of the worst things that you could possibly eat. But Pringles are off the chart, apparently. This segment not brought to you by Pringles. Pringles, a chip that I don't really feel like I want to eat. And right on cue, here comes a fire truck. We have to get going now. Geez, we're kind of running out of time. I wanted, though, if we could, if you would indulge us and the listeners, you've got all these great old crazy stories from Hollywood days. Let's reset the table here. Paul was he was a purveyor of cannabis for some of your favorite entertainers and musicians.
Oh man!
Can you pick a band, or can you pick an actor, or can you pick someone that's not going to get you in trouble? But just give us a little backstory.
I'll just
on
tell you a Hartman and Goodman story. Hartman and Goodman was the management company I worked for that was started by my oldest brother John Hartman, who is John was the first cannabis connoisseur I met.
Right.
In my life, and still is a cannabis user to this day, and you know, the music of the '60s was spurred on by good cannabis and psychedelic drugs, and it was a big thing, and in rock and roll, you know, we managed Crosby, Stills and Nash and America and bands like that, and it was traditional to have the office pound, and so you would you know, and we had these fancy offices at Crossroads of the World on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, and it was not unusual to come in and smell the aroma of cannabis burning at any given time of the day, or several people walking around with a fat one hanging out of their mouth, as traditional in California. But so my brother had this drawer in his beautiful oak desk, and people would walk over and they'd open the drawer and there was a pound of weed in it, and they'd take the rolling tray, and you know, it was not uncommon to see David Crosby or Graham Nash smoking a joint there, and for David it wasn't uncommon to see him snorting white stuff, but
Everyone knows that. You're okay.
yeah. So no, I used, you know, Ringo Starr was in Robin Williams.
And did you ever smoke with these guys, or just sell it to them?
Oh yeah,
You smoke with them.
Yeah.
So you got high with Robin Williams and Ringo Starr.
Yeah, Jack Nicholson was another one.
Jack
I used to
Nicholson.
keep his checks. I didn't
Really?
cash them. Yeah, because they said John J. Nicholson, Mulholland Drive on them.
Oh, cool.
Same with Ringo's. They said Richard Starkey. That they always came from his lawyer.
What's the biggest check you got back in the day from Jack Nicholson that you didn't cash?
Oh, $1,500.
$1,500.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing.
They always ended up getting cashed, I'll tell you, though. I tried to keep them for as long as
Eventually,
possible.
yeah. And then you tell the teller, and she's too young, doesn't even know who he is as an
Yeah.
actor. Our guest today has been Paul Hartman. It's so great to have him in, and we have scratched the surface. I think we've officially scratched the surface. There's so much more to cover. We'd love to have you back when it's convenient for you. And once again, the great, why is he here? Because he's a patient of the great Dr.
That's
Sam
right.
Malachi.
Sam saved my ass, literally.
Literally saved his ass, and now we are doing our best to return the favor to him, and we hope that you will get on our socials at Green Crush Pod and pick this thing up. And,
Buy that book. It's cheap.
It's a cheap book, and
Yeah.
it has, in price, but
Yes.
not in content.
No.
So
it's-
that's absolutely the
yeah,
case.
it's wealthy in content. And Sam's story is a holy shit story. That's all I got to say.
It's a holy shit story with another coda at the end, and I hope we can turn that around for him. So basically, before we get going, a couple quick more stories we have to get to right now. Here it is. We've been talking about who says it's effective and who doesn't say it's effective. There's not enough research, says this Mark Allen fella here up in Canada. And then we have a judge in the United States who is saying that he has heard Army veteran Jose Bellin talk about the horrors of the Iraq War, which left him with post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm sure you don't have to stretch too hard to imagine that. Being sent into a country on false pretenses to participate in an invasion that creates a lot of dead bodies, and the relatives of which decide to suit up and attack us several years later, that's going to cause some PTSD. This gentleman says that the drug helped him, cannabis that is, cope with the best symptoms. Cope best with the symptoms that he had. And his Veteran Affairs doctors could not legally prescribe it, though. But he says once he did cannabis, he felt the relief. And here now is a judge agreeing with this. This is a judge, what's his name? What's this fellow's name? Does it even matter? He says, how can you say there is no currently accepted medical use? The judge asked. Your argument does not hold, he is saying. So there are judges. There are some police officers. Not all of them climb a tree when they're high. There are many lawmakers and legislators. And I implore you, if it's at all possible, if you're listening to this show as either a critic or a fan or someone that told you you should listen to this show, I wonder if you could do us all the favor of writing to your local legislator, be it provincial or federal, and say, look, there's a ton of data on this stuff, and we no longer need to be oppressed. And maybe you don't partake in cannabis, but maybe your nephew or grandson does, and you really don't want to send people to jail like Paul has had to do and so many other people. Paul actually went away for mushrooms, but that's a different topic on a different show. Next year, this show will be called Mushroom Crush. But it's really important that you avail yourself of this information that is right at your fingertips and has been there for hundreds of years in the recent history and thousands of years well beyond that. I am telling you, I would not be sitting here without it. I absolutely know that to be the case. And I am getting a fresh update on Friday, so we will hear where I am at. And if it's good news, isn't that fantastic? And if it's not good news, I'm doubling down and going back into the green swimming pool, and we will track it. So part of me wants it to be perfect, and I don't have any problems, and I'm moving on fantastically well with my life. The other part of it wants to be, oh, it sort of came back a little bit, and these numbers are somewhere, because I have not been taking the oil in a concentrated way for some time, and perhaps I'm a chronic user. Perhaps I have to keep using this medicine, getting to a nadir of almost dying and popping out a 1,296 PSA, 1296, and 700 the other time. That was nothing. I don't know why I had this 12-point-something or other PSA fella in today, a little piker.
Yeah, I know. I feel like an ant.
This broadcasting group here at CBGT